Hello everybody, tomorrow I begin university classes again after my Christmas break, and before I go back to the university, I think it's about time I make another movie review. And this is a movie I think is very appropriate because it talks about the balances between life and being a superhero and how complicated it can be. And it's a really wonderful film. It's considered one of the greatest superhero movies of all time. And for my viewers who are watching this movie review, please consider pizza time. And that is mainly because within the first 30 minutes of the movie, there is like lines about pizza, such as these scenes.
Whoa! He stole that guy's pizza!
Pizza time.
It just makes me wish I could deliver pizza in New York City, but unfortunately I have to be bothered by Mr. Aziz when he commands me to drive through the traffic of NYC when he says this iconic line.
Cool!
Spider-Man 2 is a sequel off of the original Spider-Man movie from 2002, and this particular movie came out in the year 2004, and it stars Tobey Maguire, Kirsten Dunst, James Franco, Alfred Molina, J.K. Simmons, and so many other roles. And this movie talks about the struggles of Peter Parker and his life. It talks about how much trouble he has in New York City of balancing his own life as Peter Parker and his life as Spider-Man. So this movie is a very personal movie for the character of Peter Parker because it shows you how much trouble he's having in life. You know, he's losing his job, he is having trouble with Mary Jane, and he's even failing at school until he realizes that there is this professor that he really admires named Dr. Otto Octavius, and he too has some issues with his experiment. But once Otto Octavius decides to become very greedy about his own experiment, he turns into the iconic superhero or Spider-Man villain, Dr. Octopus. But once Peter Parker realizes that there is trouble in New York because of that, he decides to build his own momentum in order to become the better hero he is in New York City as Spider-Man. I have to say, 2004 was an amazing year to be a Spider-Man fan because Spider-Man 2 was a movie that was heavily praised by critics and audiences, and another great thing is that when you're watching the TV show with Roger Ebert when he reviews movies, he considered this movie to be one of the greatest superhero movies ever made. And at that time in 2004, you know, it passed, you know, the Superman movie from 1978, the Batman movie from 1989. And can't you believe it, with this amount of recognition it got? This was before The Dark Knight in 2008. This was 2004. 4 years before, and I remember the marketing for this movie, especially some of the ads that was going through for this film and how it was trying to promote it. But the main question of this movie review is that, are these critics right? And here's my answer. Yes, they are totally correct because Spider-Man 2 is a movie I consider to be one of the sequels even better than the original one for several reasons. Spider-Man 2 is one of those movies that just understands what a sequel needs to be. There are several elements that just go into this sequel that understands, like, how do you continue the story from the previous movie. And this movie doesn't just continue the story very well, it also continues to tell the story of Peter Parker and his life as Spider-Man, because from what this movie does so well is that it understands the character duality between how Peter Parker needs to react to other things as himself instead of Spider-Man, because this movie is more of a character study per se. And that is through wonderful, wonderful writing, because the writing of this movie just has so many plot elements how to affect the character of Peter Parker. And what this movie does is that it just really pounds him, because this movie is really focused on building the character of Peter Parker. And although this movie doesn't have too much Spider-Man, it does build up Spider-Man, but it mostly builds up Peter Parker because, you know, like what I said, he fails in class and he's having trouble with Mary Jane, and then he's losing his job. And with all of these misfortunes, even though how heartbreaking it is for Peter Parker to go through all of these really misfortunes, it's at least building his toughness and how he's meant to be.
Fired. Go. Please, I need this job. You're fired. But give me another chance.
The hardships that Peter Parker goes through is also a journey of him, how he can build himself as a character, not just Spider-Man, and how he can build his social skills with other people around him. And that's what is so great about this movie, is because it really does understand the character of Peter Parker from the Marvel Comics. And another thing that I really love about the writing of this movie is how it characterizes characters from the previous film, because this movie also does continue conflict that was placed on the first film, such as Harry Osborn and Peter having those issues of Harry thinking that Spider-Man killed his father and Peter not telling him where he is because he's Spider-Man's photographer. And then you have the conflict between Aunt May and Peter because they're still affected by Uncle Ben's death. And that just goes into play very, very well. And it even does broaden what was deep inside into their thoughts. Another aspect I really enjoyed from Spider-Man 2 was the villain. And I have to say, Alfred Molina as Dr. Otto Octavius, he is just awesome. He is a great villain per se, because he's not a villain because he is an evil guy. He is a villain because he cannot let go of his passions for science. Because in this movie, Otto Octavius wants to build this new experiment with, new electricity for New York City, and he needs tritium. But the thing is that what makes him evil is that he just cannot let go of his passion for science. He doesn't really care about what other people tell him, like, what if this can go wrong, because he just can't let go of it. He still wants to prove himself, but what makes him a villain is his refusal to listen to anybody. And that's what I think is a great thing about this movie, is that how it shows that villains are very ambitious in their own passions and gifts. Not only does Alfred Molina get wonderful lines as the villain of Otto Octavius / Dr. Octopus, he also has a lot of practical effects of the arms that are behind him most of the time.
It means I maintain control of these arms, instead of them controlling me.
Despite some of the serious tones that Spider-Man 2 has, it's not afraid to go goofy at times. There are a lot of scenes of the movie that just puts jokes in between the film so people can have a little breather and can laugh a little while, and that's what I really love about what Sam Raimi did to this film. For an example, I love the raindrops falling in my head scene.
'Cause I'm free. Nothing's worrying me.
Sorry! Based off my analysis of that scene, that funny scene, and the way how Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head was used into that scene, it is a song that is played right after Peter Parker says, "I am Spider-Man no more." And when you hear the song, it's "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head." And if you listen to that nursery rhyme, "Itsy Bitsy Spider went down the water spout," it's talking about how the raindrops are falling on Peter's head and how it's washing away the spider, which is Spider-Man. So I thought it was really clever why Sam Raimi decided to put the "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head." When that song comes, it just proves that the spider, or the Spider-Man in Peter Parker, is gone. It's washed away into the water spout through "Raindrops Are Falling on My Head." Maybe my goal tomorrow on campus is to walk like Peter Parker while listening to "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head" on my earphones and just doing this, and saying, "Raindrops keep falling on my head, they keep falling," and not care what others think about me with the way I walk.
Sleeping on the job, those raindrops are falling on my head, they keep falling.
Although this movie doesn't have that much action, as I said, because of Spider-Man 2 trying to build Peter Parker as a character, but when the action scenes come with Spider-Man in them, they are epic. And from 2004 to this year, 2019, this is still one of my favorite Marvel fight scenes 15 years later. For an example, the train fight. The train fight was one of the most cinematic Marvel fight scenes I have ever seen with my own eyes, because it just builds and builds and builds with awesomeness in every single scene and sequence. Because you have one scene where Spider-Man is just like, "Okay, where is Mary Jane?" And Otto Octavius is like, "Okay, let's fight." So they fight again, and then you get on the train, and then later Spidey just dodges a lot of things, kind of like Neo from the Matrix, and later they fight sideways. I mean, it's just so epic and awesome. Sorry for that voice crack, but I do not really care because it was meant to be, because this movie is just so epic. Really, honestly, the best thing about Spider-Man 2 is not just the fight scenes, not just the writing, nor the iconic line. It is just the feel of this movie. Because even if this movie is adapted from a comic book about a boy who was just bitten by a radioactive spider and then becomes a superhero, this is a movie that a lot of people can relate to. And the reason why I chose this movie is because as a college student myself, I can totally relate to what happens to Peter Parker in this movie. And when someone goes through life struggles of balancing life with like all these things that's going on in your head and like how to balance relationships with other people, but you're also struggling with this, That's what this movie is so good at, is how you can connect with your audience. And that is a thing that Spider-Man deserves a great thumbs up for, because when you watch this movie, you're automatically in the shoes of Peter Parker, and when you see him, you can be like, hey, that's my life as well. Because although I'm not going through the same things of Peter Parker, like financial troubles, you still have some daily struggles in your life, and that's the greatest thing I love about this movie, Spider-Man 2, is because you can just automatically relate to this guy. Because of everything I just said about Spider-Man 2 and how amazing, really amazing this movie is, of course it deserves a 10 out of 10! Whew, I had a lot of things to say about Spider-Man 2, and it's because I love that movie so much. And guys, thank you so much for watching. I had a blast making this movie review of reviewing Spider-Man 2, my favorite superhero movie, along with The Dark Knight. And thank you very much for watching. I hope you can also subscribe to this channel, and I will try my best to follow the quotes of "with great power comes great responsibility" as I go into my university classes tomorrow. But you guys are the best. Thank you so much, and thank you for watching.